Welcome to Lesson 1, Exploring Photoshop. In this lesson, you're going to go through a little bit of a fast-paced exercise that will show you some of the new features and also how to put some of the things together that you're going to be exploring in Photoshop. If you're not totally up to speed in Photoshop, you might want to skip this lesson and come back to it later and maybe go over Lesson 2 where you're exploring the workspace. In this particular lesson, you're going to be creating a 3D postcard, and 3D features are new in Photoshop. We're just going to be touching on the simplest of them here, which is the 3D postcard. And as you can see, this particular file that's open is just simply a composite of several images that have been then kind of slanted on a 3D postcard type look. So I'm going to close that up and choose File, Browse and Bridge. Now, you'll notice that throughout this book we reference Browse and Bridge, and that's because it's so much easier to navigate and find your files when you're using Bridge. You have your metadata that you can read. You also have the ability to see thumbnails of the images that you're selecting. Now, in this case, I am using Bridge because I want to easily select two files to open at the same time. So I have PS0101 selected, and I'm holding down my control key because I am on a Windows system to select the PS0102 image. And of course, if you're on the Mac, you would hold down your command key. And then I can just double click to open these up. Now, first of all, you'll notice this tab system where my images are kind of tabbed in here. This is a default on the PC system. Whether you're on the PC or the Mac, if you want to see two images at the same time, you can choose the Arrange Documents icon and then just choose the two up icon. And now I can see both of my images at the same time. Now this is important because I'm actually taking my Move tool and I'm going to drag the boy image over on top of the PS0101 image. And you'll notice that when I click and drag, on the PC, I get a little plus sign. You might just see a grayed out version of the image on the Mac. And then I'm going to drop it. And here's my image. And I'm just going to close this file. And now I have a little bit more space to work with this one image, which has already created a composite of two images. Now, I don't necessarily want this whole image in here. So I am going to use the lasso tool for a really quick selection. This is not a great selection, doesn't have to be. If I wanted to clean it up, I could, of course, hold down my Shift key with the lasso tool and add to the selection. Or if I add it too much in certain areas, I can hold down the Alt key and then I can also delete a chunk of a selection. Okay, but I'm going to say this one's good enough. Now I'm going to find a new panel, and the panel is called Masks. And if you don't see it immediately, you can go underneath Window, and that lists all your panels, and I'll choose Masks. And in here, I'll just say to create or add a pixel mask, and I click on that, and this really horrid mask appears, and I'm going to fix this though. And how I'm going to fix this is by maybe feathering it and smoothing it out a little bit. There's an option directly in the Masks panel that's called Mask Edge, and if I click on that, I can come up here and I can set different settings. Like for instance, maybe I want to increase the radius of how much edge I'm selecting and changing. Maybe the contrast, I'm going to leave that down at 0. Maybe I want to zoom it out, I'll leave that at 3, but I want to feather it to about a 10. You can either use the sliders in here, or if it's a little bit easier, you can just select those values and then type in the value that you want. I can also contract or expand this if I was trying to make it swell in or out my selection area. But I'm going to leave this for right now and click OK. Okay, so I have these two images in here. I'm now going to go ahead and add another image. I'm going to take my Move tool and just reposition him a little bit. And of course, if you want to edit your mask further, you can just click on this mask. Do you see how this is selected, the image, because it's got the bars around it? And if I click on this one, now that has the bars around it, or the corner marks. I can now take my paintbrush. I'm going to press D to make sure I have the default colors of black and white. And you'll notice that if I paint in certain areas with white as my foreground color, I'm actually opening up that mask and maybe getting areas that I missed. And if I press X, boom, it changes to black. And I can then eliminate some areas that I didn't want to begin with. And as you can see, I've got this really kind of hard brush here. I'm going to throw in some tips here that you'll also find later throughout this book. If you just simply look at your keyboard, you'll see two brackets to the right of the letter P. If you press the right bracket, your brush size becomes larger. If you press the left bracket, your brush size becomes smaller. If I press the right bracket and make this larger, it's still maybe got a little bit too hard of an edge for me. I can press Shift right bracket to make my brush harder, or Shift left bracket to make my brush softer. You see I now have a softer edge in here, and I can just make this a little bit better. Okay, so now I'm going to add another image in here, but I don't want to destroy my image that I've got already. So I'm going down to the background layer and activating it, and I'm going to create a new layer. Now if I create a new layer, it as the default will go on top of the active layer that I have selected. And it will just be called layer 1 or layer 2 or whatever it wants to be called at that point. If I hold down my Alt or Option key and click on the new layer icon, it brings up a dialog box so that I can name this ahead of time. So I'm going to call this graphic and press OK. And now I'm going to choose File, Browse and Bridge, open up a graphic, PS0103. And again, just choose that I want to see these two up. And now I'm going to use the clone tool. Now the neat thing about the clone tool in CS4 is that you're going to see a preview prior to me cloning as an automatic feature. So in other words, if I come over to my graphic over here, I'll select my clone tool. I'm going to Alt or Option click. I'm going to come back to this image, but before I do, I'm going to make sure that my blending mode is set for overlay and that my opacity is set for 20%. Now, I'm going to come back to this image. I'm just going to click on the PS0101 tab. And even though I Alt or Option clicked on this image over here, the PS0103 image, I can still clone from one image to another. And look at that, I've got a little preview and even show me the brush size of what I'm going to create. Now, you can change the brush size by just right-clicking anywhere. I have this set at 200 pixel, and I have the hardness set at 0, which means it's a very soft brush. I'm just going to click, hit the Enter key to get that out of there, and I'm going to start painting right above his head, and you'll see that with that light opacity, I can continue to add to this selection. So it gets darker where I'm painting it over and over again because it's adding 20% on top of 20% on top of 20%. That looks good enough for me. I'm going to close up this other image and I'm going to select the type tool and I'm going to go ahead and just click anywhere, and this automatically creates a new type layer. Now in this particular image, I'm going to go ahead and type bike on. And I'm not sure what typeface I want to use, but I can select my typeface name up here at the top and just press the arrow key down until I find one that I like, and that looks okay. But the size maybe isn't exactly what I want. Now, I could do a couple things. I can visually change the size by holding down my Control and Shift and then pressing the greater than key. Or if I am sure I have a certain size that I want to use, I can type in, like for instance, 36 right here. Now, what you'll notice is that in this case, the text is black. I want it white. So I'm going to select it again, make sure it's active. Click on the color up here in the text area, text options, choose white, press OK. And now I also want to change the leading. So what I do to change the leading is I hold down my Alt key and hit the arrow key up, and you can see it immediately sprung up behind the other text, which looks really bad. But now I can press Alt down. And this is the same on the Mac. You would just use your Option key up or down. So you can see now, up or down to control what's called the leading. Now, if you're fine with all of this, you can just press the confirm and take your move tool if you want to reposition it. Next thing I want to do is perhaps I want to apply a filter to just this boy, and I want to make him look like he's black and white. I'm going to use the adjustment layers to do this, and you'll see a new way that adjustment layers are applied now in Photoshop CS4. So I'm going to select this, And then down at the bottom, I'm going to choose from the Add New Fill or Adjustment layer, I'm going to choose black and white. And you'll see it applies to everything. That's fine for right now. I'm going to activate this little button that allows me to click and drag in the image to modify it. And notice that when I click on the reds, you see over to the right, the reds are being adjusted. So it's just lightening or darkening the reds in the image. Or if I click on his face, red, now cyan for his helmet. This I'm just adjusting visually. And once I have it right, I might say, that's great, but you know, typically adjustment layers apply to everything that is beneath them. I don't want to do that for this. I'm going to choose this neat little handy button that says, this adjustment affects all layers below, and say, no, not really, just the one that's directly below. And so now that layer is the only layer that's affected by that adjustment layer. Now, next, I'm going to go ahead and take all of these layers and I'm going to convert them into one smart object. Smart objects are discussed throughout this book, but just so you know, it's an easier way for me to apply the 3D feature, as I will be applying the 3D postcard feature to one layer. So I will take all of these. You'll notice I'm going to drag out the layers panel so you can see it a little bit better. And I've got black and white selected. Hold down my shift key, go all the way down to background. And now I'm just going to simply from the panel menu say convert all of these to a smart object, one image. This is actually a really great way to apply filters and all sorts of things when you want to do them to multiple layers. Now, I've got this, but I don't really have the space I need in this image. Everything is kind of butting up to the edge. So what I'm going to do is just choose image canvas size, not image size. And I'm going to say, you know, I need these to be 125% larger, just so I have some white space or transparent space around this. Click OK. All right, I've got that. And now what I'm going to do is this area down here, I'm going to just go ahead and crop this out. I had left this in. I'm going to just make a selection. And in this case, I'm going to say go ahead and apply a mask to that. Good. And so all I have is simply this postcard that is not 3D yet. I'm going to choose 3D, which is a new menu item. New 3D postcard from layer. Okay, it does nothing, right? That's because we haven't rotated it yet. If you click on one of the new handy dandy 3D rotate tools, you can click and drag. And now you can rotate any way you want your new 3D postcard. So that's the gist of what you're going to see in exploring your Photoshop in Lesson 1. Hopefully this helps you to kind of put together what you're reading in the lesson file. But your finished project should look something like this, where you have multiple layers converted into a smart object, and then you apply the 3D filter.